She walked into my room like she owned the night he sat in the dim bunk of the outpost on the cold moon of Calder Ridges. Air hummed with old vents and thin power linishes. Dame was Tyler, and his hands shook from long work and little sleep. Thought he was a Lanathan. The door side open without a sound. Stepped in as if the room belonged to her, since the first star was born. Moved with calm grace and bright eyes that held the color of deep ocean. Her hair fell like a shadow, and her skin carried a faint glow from the dust of the ridge. Was not human, and he knew it, and his bone-sure name would later be known as Lyrian among many names. But here she was, only the woman who owned the night, wore a cloak of woven light that shifted with tiny sparks, and her boots left no mark. Tried to speak, but sound stuck in his throat. Placed a long hand on the bulkhead, and the lights rose by a breath. She looked around as if she was taking measure of a forgotten home. Esh walked slow, as if every step had meaning. Stopped at his desk and read the small notes he kept on paper, since he did not trust old screens. Traced the lines and smiled in a way that was kind yet dangerous. She turned to him. "You have called in." "I have come," she said in a soft voice that felt like a tide. Tyler shook his head, for he had sent no call. "You and your kind send a call with your will," she said. "You build and you break and you try again, and your trying is a horn in the dark rose." From the cot and found his voice. "Woe, are you?" he asked without sound for the words. "Did not need air in that room. I am a watcher," she said, "and also a maker, and I have sisters beyond the ice line. Have walked through the dust in the slow light too. Find the one who holds the signal of change. You are that one," she said. His heart beat hard, but he stood still. Took a step closer, and he saw the pattern of tiny stars moving under her skin like a maffer. Eyes read him as if he was a book. "You think you are small," she said, "but you are not. Your people rise from storms and make ships out of scrap and hop ore. People stand when the wind screams and the ground." Shakush reached into her cloak and drew a thin device that shone like a blade, but it was not a weapon. Set it on the desk, and it showed a field of lights. Each light was a voice. She said, "Some are your kind, and some are mine, and many are lost." Own voice calls for help from far beyond the rim. There is a vessel of my kin held by a swarm that feeds on thought. Me sisters went to bring them home, and did not return. Your kind is near in the map of paths. Your stations, your ships, your small brave crew." Looked at his hands, and then at his. "I see you fix things," she said, "and you do not stop. Come and help, and I will owe a debt to your name and to your people." He thought of the stories told in the canteen by Megan and Claire and Ashley and Natalie when the shift was long and the soup was thin. Thought of the talk of aliens with silver eyes, and of dark fleets, and of deals made in the airlock at dawn. Thought of the long line of his family who crossed old seas on old Earth. Nottage did not smile, but the room grew warmer, as if the vents liked his answer. "There is a way," she said. "It is not a safe road, but it is clean and true." Touched the device, and the lights spun and formed a clear path through the rim storms. "We'll need a ship," he said with careful breath. "We'll need a crew," she said, "and the crew must be brave and also kind. Your people are rich in such souls scent." A quiet ping through the local net, and the replies came quick. Lauren from the mining tether. Arms were strong, and whose laugh could push back fear. Kitty from the cum tower, who could find a signal in a storm of noise. Medicine from the fuel farm, who knew the language of vengeance and never missed a beat. So from the med bay, who kept steady hands when the belt spun to fast. Page from the mapping wing, who could read a void like a road along a field. Came to the bunk and saw the woman and felt the strange pull she had known. Asked who she was, for the answer was already in. The Airlyrian looked at each in turn and gave a small bow that felt like respect from a long distance. Told them of the swarm that eats thought, and of the sisters beyond. The Icelanish told them of a ship held in a web of dark mines near the edge where time grows. Thin room grew still, and the only sound was the hum of the vents and the slow beat of human hearts. Lauren spoke first with her voice low. "Go," she said. Katie set her jaw and nodded. Madison rolled her shoulders and smiled in a way that said, "I have a wrench and I am ready." Zoe checked her pack and said, "I will keep you all in one piece." Page traced the path of lights with a finger. It said, "I see the way." Lyrian touched the device again, and it sank into the desk as if the metal wanted to hold. Sefesh led them down the hall and into the dock, where an old tug waited with a hull like a scar. Tyler knew the tug and loved it even when it bucked and spithy, named it Lucy after a friend who once stayed up all night to keep a power core from freezing Glirian, walked around Lucy and laid her hand on the hull, and the old tug shivered like a tired dog, whispered in a tongue that tasted like stars, and the weld settled in the pipes. Sighed in relief, Madison laughed and said, "Now that is the kind of tune-up I like." The loaded crates and coils and old tools kept for Luckatai tuned the dish and found a line in the noise where they could ride page. Set a course that hugged the quiet edges between big storms and small. Trapso stocked the tiny med bay and taped a small sun charm to the wall. Because small light matters in dark place, Lauren checked suits and tethers and magnets and drew a heart on the locker door, because hope needs. A Chapelerian stood at the hatch and watched with a patience that felt like a mountain watching a river. Tyler strapped in at the pilot cradle and felt the tug answer his touch like a stubborn friend. Glanced at Lyrian and found her eyes on him, and that steadied him. Lucy pushed off with a groan, and the dock fell away. Ridge turned small, and the stars turned. Largethi slid into the path of lights, and the tug moved like a craft half its Agethi. Rode the line while storms raged to the side like wild seas that did not see them. Ketty kept the signal strong. Page called. Small changes at the right. Tim and Madison sang to the engine in a low hum that kept the rhythm. Clenlorn watched the windows and kept the crew calm with a smile that meant we have this show, checked vitals and made warm tea and passed it hand to hand. Lyrian stood near the hatch and spoke to the path in her mind, and the path spoke back. Swarm came into view as a dark cloud that did not move like a cloud. It was a mass of minds that had turned inward and fed on their own fear until they fed on others. In the center hung a ship of light like a seed caught in Tarthet. Is my kin, she said, and her voice shook not with fear but with care. How do we cut the web? Tyler asked with careful breath. Weth. Do not cut, she said. Way speak. Humans are loud of heart, and that is your gift too. We'll call them and remind them of the shape of Hapesh, placed her hand on the cum board and left a faint glokity, took the mic in her voice, went out in a slow, wide wavesh, told a story of a small town on Earth where people left porch lights on during storms so that neighbors could find the way. Homaloran told a story of a mining line that snapped and how everyone grabbed the rope and held until the last worker came. In Safe, Madison told a story of a broken gear that looked useless until someone turned it just right and it fit and drove the whole machinazo. Told a story of a room full of fear that turned quiet when someone held a hand and did not let go. Page told a story of a trail through dark woods that looked lost until a child saw how the moss grew on one side of the trees and found the north. Tyler spoke last and told a story of staying up with a friend through a long night and how dawn came slow, and then all at Onsolarian listened, and her eyes grew bright like dawn on Iseth. Swarm moved, and for a breath it seemed to reach for Themphin. The dark cloud shivered and drew back as if it felt the warmth of the porch light and could not eat. With web around the ship, Luzanda Illyrian reached out with both hands and sang a low note, and the note was not for ears, but for the shape of Firth web, broke like frost under Sunth's ship, drifted free, but weak. Tyler eased. Lucy closed her. Lauren launched lines. Madison set clamps. Page held them steady in a lane no wider. Then a whisper. Zoe watched life signs on the strange ship and called numbers with calm ease. Katie kept the cum wave soft and steady like a hand on a shoulder. Thee pulled the ship from the last threads of the swarmed dark cloud, snapped, and then dissolved like a bad dream when someone turns on a lamp. Lyrian sank to one knee and breathed for a long moment. Our sisters speak, she said, and her voice was full of relief. Say we are seen and we are safe, and they think your name shatch is opened. On the rescued ship, and figures stepped out with skin of pale night and eyes like open sky. Thee were women too, and their faces showed deep lines of long travel and long fight and deep care for one another. Throne bowed to Lyrian and then to the human. Krush touched Lauren on the sleeve and smiled at the heart on the locker. Dorsch touched Katie on the brow and smiled at the calm. Boyce touched Madison on the hand and smiled at the oil that marked a worker who does not stop. She touched Zoe on the shoulder and smiled at the small sun charm. She touched Paige on the finger that had traced the paths, touched Tyler on the chest, and smiled at the steady breath. Lyrian stood, and her eyes met Tyler and the crew and her sisters all at once. Shesh spoke, and her words filled the two ships. Your kind has a fire that does not die when night grows long. Your kind hears fear and answers with a story and a hand and a light.